Welcome to Downtown Sports. My name is Downtown Stephen Brown, and in today's video, guys, I would like to talk about John Tavares. This isn't something I usually do. This is a very YouTuber typical type thing, but I'm going to set a like goal on this video. Let's try to hit 500 likes on this video. That's pretty ambitious, but I think you guys can do it. And if you're new here and you enjoyed the video, please do consider subscribing. It does help out the channel a lot. Because a lot of people are down on this player right now, and rightfully so. You know, he posted his lowest point total in a full season since his rookie year with just 65 points in 80 games this past season, and he followed that up by having just 2 points in 7 playoff games, and the Maple Leafs lost in the first round again. But while people are also down on this player, I think that most understand that this was always going to be the reality heading into the 7th year of this contract. You know, he's 33, turning 34. I don't think anyone expected him to be an elite player still at this point in his career. And while people are down on this player, I also think that most understand that this was always going to be the reality. You know, he's 33, turning 34 years old at this point. We're heading into the 7th and final year of this contract. I don't think anyone expected him to still be an elite player at this point in his career, but still, we're only 2 years away from him having scored 36 goals, which was his 4th highest total of his entire career. And obviously, he's not worth $11 million anymore. And that's where the bulk of the frustration stems from. And in being realistic here, you know, it hasn't worked. This core hasn't gotten it done in 8 years with Matthews, Marner, and Nylander. They haven't gotten it done in 6 years with Tavares added to that group. So in wanting to make a change to the core four, the obvious choice is the 33 turning 34-year-old. But he's the captain of this team. He came home. He's got a family. He's got a full no-move clause. And he's not going anywhere. So if this player is going to be here for another season, I think we need to have a conversation about what this player is and what we can realistically expect from him moving forward. But right off the hop, I can tell you what this player isn't right away, and that's a third-line player. I'll say it again, 2 points in 7 playoff games is bad. I'm not saying that it isn't. But if we're looking at a larger sample size than just 7 games, this past year at 5-on-5, so we're excluding the power play, which is by far John Tavares' greatest strength as an offensive player, especially at this point in his career. His 1.9 points per 60 minutes at 5-on-5 this season were in line, so right around the same, if not more, than Dylan Larkin, Matt Barzal, Steven Stamkos, Nick Suzuki, Martin Necas, Brock Besser, Claude Giroux. And none of those players are thought of as third liners. So why is it that John Tavares is being labeled as a third liner? Well, it mostly stems from a stretch of games from January of this past year where he went pointless in 9 straight games, which was the worst 9-game stretch of his entire career. If we take a look under the hood at that 9-game stretch at 5-on-5, John Tavares was tied with Austin Matthews in terms of individual high-danger shot attempts. And those are shot attempts coming from point blank directly in front of the net. You can't get any more dangerous than that. And he had just 6 fewer scoring opportunities overall, and yet Matthews had 6 goals and 8 points, and Tavares had 0 all across the board. You know, I'm also not going to pretend like John Tavares has as good of a shot as Austin Matthews, but even if we split the difference, you know, we're looking at a guy like Pontus Holmberg on this list. He had about half as many scoring opportunities as John Tavares did, and yet was able to score 2 goals and 5 points. With some better luck, is John Tavares able to score 2 goals and 5 points over this stretch? I don't see any reason why that wouldn't be the case. What followed that 9-game stretch was the Maple Leafs deciding to juggle their lines a couple of weeks later, and that led to an 11-game stretch between February the 21st and March the 19th, where if you were just looking at the graphic that the Maple Leafs tweet out with their lineup pregame, it had John Tavares listed as their third-line center. So if this is where you're getting your notion that John Tavares is a third-liner from, Well, let's do a deeper dive into those 11 games where he was listed as the team's third line center on the graphic that the team puts out before the game. If we're taking a look at that 11 game sample in which he was listed as the team's third line center on that pregame graphic, and we're comparing it to the 69 games in which he was listed as the team's second line center, if we're looking at his average time on ice at 5-on-5, and it's 5-on-5 because that's where the second and third line exists, there isn't too much of a difference in terms of the amount that he was playing. But if we're looking at the percentage of his ice time that he spent playing up against the other team's best players, it was actually higher when he was listed as the team's third line center. So I'll leave it up to you in your own interpretation. He was listed as the team's third line center, but is that really how the Maple Leafs used him? No. The points per 60 went up quite a bit as well. The expected goals for percentage was about the same. The A more accurate way to describe what the Maple Leafs did over those 11 games, they didn't demote John Tavares to the third line. I think a more accurate representation of what they actually did is they tried to balance out their second and third lines by trying to give Max Domi a larger role playing center. Another way to look at this would be to come over to hockeyviz.com and look at the heat map for John Tavares when he's on the ice and guys like Matthews, Marner, and Nylander are not. And the reason why I didn't do this immediately is because I wanted to be able to contextualize what you're seeing now and know that when Tavares is out there without those other three guys, he's not going up against the other team's third and fourth lines. He's still playing up against the other team's best players, and by himself or with McMahon, Robertson, and Yarncroke, the Maple Leafs are still able to be a very good offensive team while also not giving a whole ton back defensively. In fact, if we're looking at John Tavares without Marner, Matthews, and Nylander, obviously his most common line mate being William Nylander, Tavares isn't going to be able to be as good offensively without a guy like Nylander. But it's not a mystery or a revelation or anything like that. Good players make other good players better. And the more help that you have, the better. But still, if we're looking at the two lines' overall impact, obviously, Nylander, when he's out there with John Tavares, they're not as good defensively overall. Willie's not the greatest example of what to do defensively, anyway. But this is a 20% swing when Nylander and Tavares are out there together. And when it's just Tavares out there with guys like, again, McMahon, Robertson, and Yarncroke, it's a 23% swing in favor of the Maple Leafs, both offensively and defensively. So if you could split them up and create three very good lines and then situationally put them back together, if you're down a goal late in the third period, that just sounds like a smart strategy. And also, for a player like Tavares, who was never very quick, he's always been a bit of a slower player, and especially over the last couple of years, he's slowed down even more. But he still is able to be a very effective player standing in front of the other team's net. And for a guy who's turning 33, turning 34, if he's able to maintain that level of play in front of the net, it bodes well for a guy who is getting older. Which brings us to the next part of this conversation. Tavares' contract does expire at the end of the season. What do we do with this player beyond next season? Are we letting him walk as a UFA? Do we want him to stay? What does that extension even look like? And according to Dom over at The Athletic, this past season, John Tavares was not an $11 million player, which I think we can all agree on. But according to Dom's value, his market value was around $9 million. And if you think that's a little bit generous and you want to shave a little bit off of that, because I think it is being a little bit generous, you could say he was worth between $7 and $8 million. And I don't think you would find too many objections with that, considering a player like Elias Lindholm, who's coming off of two very down years, was able to get $7.5 million or around that number from the Boston Bruins as a UFA on a long-term deal. But I have no interest in signing a 35-year-old John Tavares because that's how old he's going to be when that deal kicks in for $7 million. The problem with his contract right now is that he's having trouble living up to that $11 million number. Why would you then turn around and sign him to a similar type deal, especially if there's going to be term attached to that? So about a month ago, I had the idea of maybe you sign him to an extension that has a low AAV, but way too much term, and 6 to 7 years would be way too much term. But if you're able to get him for around $3 million on a deal like that, you won't have much trouble living up to those expectations, especially as the salary cap continues to increase. The first couple of years of that deal would be an absolute steal in a window where the Maple Leafs still have Austin Matthews and William Nylander on the team. Obviously, we don't know what's going on with Mitch Marner, but the competitive window for this team is the next 4 years. And if you think that John Tavares at $3 million can help you over the next couple of seasons, or allow you to maybe move him to the wing or reduce his role to the point where he's actually a third line center, I think you should explore this type of idea. For $3 million in a reduced role by either moving him to the wing or actually playing him as your third, even your fourth line center, can he still be an effective offensive player in front of the net? Can he still bolster your power play? Can he still continue to win faceoffs at a near 60% clip, which is what he's been at over the last 3 seasons? Is that worth $3 million? I think so. Like we said, especially as the salary cap continues to rise. And I was laughed at for that idea on Twitter. And I don't know, maybe rightfully so. Maybe 7 years is too long. But I was vindicated about a week later when it was reported that the Tampa Bay Lightning were interested in doing something very similar with Steven Stamkos, signing him to a low $3 million AAV over the course of an 8-year contract. At least I was saying 6 to 7 years, being a little bit conservative there. Now, obviously, that idea didn't end up working out with the Lightning and Steven Stamkos because he's a Nashville Predator now. But still, I think it's something worth exploring if you're the Maple Leafs with a guy like Tavares, because if we're comparing the two, Tavares is 33, turning 34. Steven Stamkos is a year older. He's already 34. I don't know if he's turning 35 yet. But they're very similar players. They're both captains of their teams, or at least both of them were. Stamkos was the Lightning's franchise player. He had won 2 Stanley Cups for them, and obviously that's a little bit different than John Tavares with the Leafs. But Steven Stamkos considers Tampa Bay home, and John Tavares, Toronto is home for him. And if he wants to be a Maple Leaf that badly, there is something to be worked out that makes sense for both sides. And if we're comparing the two players and where they are at this point in their careers, I would say that Stamkos is the better offensive player. Obviously, he scored 42 goals and had 84 points last season. He's the better power play player anyway. They're both not the greatest at 5-on-5 at this point in their careers. But where Stamkos gives some of that offense back, Tavares doesn't. Tavares is the better defensive player. So the gap between the two isn't that large, in my opinion. But that's also getting a little bit ahead of ourselves, right? We still have this upcoming season to go through. And in coming back to the numbers that we referenced earlier on in the video, John Tavares, playing on the Maple Leafs second line, playing on their third line according to the pregame graphic. I think this highlights a very important idea that the Maple Leafs should really circle back to and put some more stock in for this upcoming season, and that's balancing out their lines and having 3 effective lines rather than 2 that are more top heavy. And this really sort of does just connect all the dots and bring the conversation full circle in what we've been talking about here on this channel for the last week or so, and that's that the Maple Leafs need a more capable third line center, or they need to surround Max Domi with better players than Nick Robertson and Calle Jarnkrok to maybe prop him up in areas of his game that aren't so good. In the playoffs, when he was playing center and he was able to be effective against the Bruins, he was playing next to Mitch Marner, so maybe they need to staple Max Domi to Mitch Marner in the minutes that he's playing center, because if we're looking at the numbers for Max Domi when he was playing center with Nick Robertson and Calle Jarnkrok, and this was the line that he played the most ice time playing center with, all of the percentages look good here. But if we're just looking at the volume and the quality of offense that this trio produced, they ranked 125th among forward lines that played at least 100 minutes together last season and expected goals for per 60. That's not good enough. So I'm going to keep marching to the beat of my own drum here and say that the Maple Leafs need a more capable third line center. Or I'm open to the idea of Max Domi being that player if they can surround him with some better line mates. You know, maybe situationally it's Mitch Marner, but in other cases they need Mitch to play those defensive minutes, so you got to shuffle things around. But ideally, Max just plays on the wing next to Austin Matthews. You know, he was great there last season. I think he had 15 points in the final 17 games of the regular year when Marner was out with that injury, and he was playing with Bertuzzi, Matthews, and Domi on that top line. There's been a number of players over the last couple of seasons that have tried to play with Austin Matthews, and they've been terrible. Domi was great. Just play him in that spot. Go out, acquire a legitimate third line center, roll 3 lines, and have success. And you can do that by moving on from someone like David Kampf and replacing them with Fraser Minton or someone like Connor Dewar, and then moving on from a guy like Connor Timmins. You know, you can have between 2.5, 2.7-ish million dollars. We talked about this in the previous video. Go and watch that video because we did a deep dive on a bunch of players that the Maple Leafs can go out and acquire and that they can afford to acquire that might be good fits in that spot. I like how the conversation kind of came full circle there and we were able to put a nice little bow on it. You know, John Tavares, he's getting older. Yes, 2 points in 7 playoff games wasn't good, but if you play him in the right role, you surround him with the right players. You know, you roll 3 lines. Maybe if he gets a little bit more puck luck than he did last year, I still think he could score 30 goals. I still think he could put up 70 points. I still think that he's a very capable player. But that's going to be it for this one, so make sure to let me know what your thoughts and opinions are down in the comment section below. I know John Tavares is not a very popular player, so I'm not expecting a lot of those comments to be productive or positive or so, but I understand where your frustration is coming from, and I do hear you. And your comments and you watching the videos are appreciated, even though we may disagree on this topic. But I asked it in the previous video, not in the actual video, but in a pinned comment. When did you start watching this channel? You know, some people responded with like 4 or 5 years ago, and I'm like, that's crazy. This channel was bad back then. You know, I did not know what I was doing. Not that I do now, but maybe a little bit more so than I did back then. Let me know, how long have you been watching? If you remember the video or the situation that caused you to subscribe or anything like that, I would also like to hear that as well. Make sure to leave me a like on the video if you did like it, because that really does help out the channel. And subscribe because more is on the way. And I'll see you in the next one.